Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. Today is my conversation with Emily Grishman, who is a music copyist. I was so excited to have this conversation because Emily is the first person I've talked to on this show who's a music copyist. So we get into, what does a music copyist do? She owns Emily Grishman Music Preparation in New York City. They do the music preparation for tons and tons of Broadway shows. If you're a musician, you've probably played a show that Emily has worked on. And so it was so fun to sit down and talk to her and just hear about another facet of theater and have a chance to talk to someone who does a job that really is pretty behind the scenes and not much is known about. If you like the Backstage Creative, I would love if you would leave a rating or review wherever you listen. That would be so helpful. I love to get feedback. Also, come on over to the Backstage Creative Facebook page and like that. That's where I post unofficial show notes, I guess. Well, I mean, I don't know what makes them official. Where I post show notes, where I post people's websites or articles that we talk about or something. So come on over there and like that. And then I also post when I put out new episodes. So then that way you won't miss an episode. If you subscribe, that also has the same effect. But anyway, I'm excited to get to this conversation with Emily. So here we go. Here's my conversation with Emily Grishman. I think it would be good. So you're the first music copyist I've had on the show. I'm not familiar enough with your world to know of like other people that do what you do. So I think it'd be a good place to start. Like, what do you do? What does a music copyist do? What is their role in the theater world?
Well, I'm a music copyist in New York. I have a small office in Times Square. And until the pandemic shutdown, I was doing mostly Broadway shows, but all kinds of other work as well as a copyist for regional theaters and for any other work that comes along, recording work, film work, television, etc. But I landed mostly in theater music copying. What I do is I work with composers and orchestrators, and also with music directors. I work with the music team of a show. My main job is to ultimately provide instrumental parts for the band that is going to play that show. So I'm not a creative person, I'm a crafts person that works with the creative people. And I act really as the closest thing I can say would be to act as a music editor. And I put the music, ultimately, I'm responsible for printing parts and putting them on the music stand for the players. In the process of working on a show, the music copyist is really on the spot all the time because we might have a show that is in previews for 4, 5, 6 weeks. And when a show is in previews, music changes every day can change every day because they're working on the show during the afternoon, during the day, and then in the evening the show is performed. But during the day while they're rehearsing, the director can want something different. They can want a scene that's shorter. Choreographer can say, I need 8 more counts here, or we're cutting the whole intro to this song, or a new actor might come in and it might be in a different key, etc. So every single day I await a list of changes, certainly lyric changes, script changes, and all of that has to get reflected into the players' parts by that evening's show. So my job is really to move quickly and respond to those changes and keep track of all of the musical elements that have to be provided for the players. That's the basic job of a music copyist.
So are you, do orchestrators and arrangers kind of come in with everything pretty much ready to go and just kind of like, give you a big pile of papers on your desk? Are they sending you files? How does that work?
Well, that work has changed over the years. Of course, I've been doing this for more decades than I've probably 4 decades. And of course, when I started, everything was done by hand. There was no such thing as computer notation, a computer notation program. So in the day, composers and orchestrators picked up a pencil or a pen and wrote scores on paper. And I would, in fact, get piles of paper from those people and then I would begin my work, which meant that I'd start my day with a pile of empty blank manuscript paper on the left side of my desk. I would do my work, and at the end of the day, I'd have a nice pile of music filled in on the right side of my desk. And it was very satisfying, I have to tell you, because you could really measure your day's work. Now I do get all kinds of a variety of source material. So some people still write by hand, in which case I do the music entry work using either MIDI keyboard or sometimes other keyboard entry methods. I use either Finale or Sibelius. I just am investigating Dorico, which is the latest entry into the lineup. So the files that arrive to me come in a variety of qualities, let's say. Sometimes people are really great. The people that are orchestrating are really great users of Finale or Sibelius. Sometimes they're not. They just want to get their stuff done, and they're not supposed to be copyists. They're supposed to be doing their creative work. So they don't pay attention to any of the really, the finer points, and that really is my job. So I don't really mind the condition, of the material as I get it. I just have to know how to manipulate it appropriately to make the final product. When I get handwritten music, I have to say I still enjoy that job the most. It makes me most connected to the work that I'm doing, and it's much less just moving objects around a page. It's I feel much more connected to the actual process when I'm looking at a handwritten score than when I'm just moving data. Sometimes there's also transcription work involved. A lot of times these days, composers and well, orchestrators are all literate in obviously in notation. That's their job. But sometimes composers will just provide audio files, or sometimes MIDI files, or any kind of audio files. It can be logic files, it can be other things. And then it can also be the copyist's job to actually transcribe from audio to notation. And that's a different set of skills, of course, than just being a copyist per se.
Yeah, it sounds like you need to have a lot of like different skills at your fingertips, to accommodate for how things come in.
Yeah, I mean, you asked in some place that when you had given me a couple of ideas about what we would talk about, you asked about what skills are needed to do the job, and certainly I'll answer that, which is a great understanding of music theory and chord structures, chord symbols. You really want to understand how instruments work in general, how they're played. In addition, now you have to have really good computer skills because you're on your own. You're working against a deadline. You're working with your computers. You're working with different programs, and you can't be dependent on somebody else to solve your problems. So you need to have really good technical skills. You also need to have a good eye for graphics, because what we ultimately do is we're graphic artists as well as musicians. We're dealing with layout on the page, white space, how to make something easier to read for a player. Of course, my main goal is to make the music read easily and to have not 1 minute of rehearsal time wasted discussing notation issues, wrong notes, or missing music, or any of the things that can happen when you're preparing music. You want to make sure that all of that is taken care of. You have to have a maniacal care for details, of course, being a great proofreader. And that's what's required for providing the musical part of the job. You also really have to have good people skills, because you're dealing with a lot of people in a music department, and being good with your colleagues is how you, number one, how you well, it's how you get your next job, really. you know um,
Mhm.
People want to work with you, and you have to have those kinds of good relations with everyone. You also have to have good negotiating skills. If you're the one dealing with a producer or a general manager who is setting up the business aspect of the job, you have to know how to explain the job to them. You have to have a good understanding of the pricing scheme. You have to be able to negotiate so that things turn out well for both. I'm a believer in fairness on both sides. I take great care to make sure that the people that work with me are fairly compensated, but also that the people who are purchasing the services are getting what they contract for. And I'm a member of a union. I'm a member of Local 802, part of the American Federation of Musicians, and I only do work under union contracts. I have a great luxury of being in a city that supports that, and I have a great luxury of having been around long enough to actually stick by that process. I have a lot of support in being able to turn to contracts that have been negotiated for pricing. That's an overview on skills.
Mm-hmm. How many? Do you know exactly how many shows you've worked on?
Oh gosh, how many shows altogether? No, I could not tell you, but I can tell you that I have been the music prep supervisor on probably about 130 Broadway shows.
Ooh.
That I can tell you. It started, my first one was Once on This Island. That was a transfer from an off Broadway theater, Playwrights Horizons. And I worked with Michael Starobin on that. He was the orchestrator, composer Steve Flaherty, Lynn Ahrens, lyricist. And we worked on that at Playwrights Horizons. And then it was picked up to move to Broadway. So I moved with it. And that was my first Broadway job. The last thing that I was working on was a show by Tom Kitt called Flying Over Sunset that was about to preview on the day of the shutdown in March 2020. So that's the span of the Broadway shows. And of course, I can't count all the regional and off Broadway productions I've done. I've worked at, all across the country, from the Old Globe, La Jolla, Goodman, ACT, ART, the Alliance in Atlanta, Signature in Virginia, all over the place. So I really, I mean, it's got to be hundreds, you know.
Yeah, that's such a cool legacy to have. You've had your hand in so much magic that's
Well,
happened on the stage.
it's very funny, Krista, because when I first started when we were copying by hand and doing union work, we always put our union number in the lower left corner, in ink, on our pages, right? And that was to identify whose work it was. Although in the day it was very easy to identify copyists' work because we knew each other's handwriting. It wasn't a mystery. It's like, oh, this one's Kathy. Oh, this is, there's Bert. Oh, there, you could tell whose work was whose, right? It was like it was handwriting. Now with the computer, of course, you can't easily tell whose work is whose. So we still put our union number on the lower left, but when I started my template in Finale way back in the 90s, I put my name on the bottom of the page as well. And I didn't think of it in any way at the time as advertising. It was just, I was identifying my work because suddenly there it was on a computer and it looked like everybody else's work, right?
Hmm.
And I didn't realize that it actually would create, I didn't mean it to do it, but it created a sort of a brand. And I have been all over the world, and where I'll step into, I'll introduce myself to a music director who's conducting a show that I might have worked on, and they look up with wide eyes and they say, "There's really an Emily Grishman? We didn't have any idea." And it's very funny because it's a little embarrassing. I didn't really, as I say, I didn't intend that to happen, but I am actually known all over the place because of that. And so it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of fun now. I've embraced it.
I need to pay more attention now that the next time I play a show to look at that lower
Oh,
left
when
hand
you get
corner.
when you get material, sometimes if it comes from the rental company, they might have deleted that information, but a lot of times it'll be there. So you'll see. There's some shows that still go out with some of my handwritten work, so
Oh,
that's
cool.
another one to look for.
Awesome. So I'd love to hear about your background, where you're from, any like college or school you went to, and how you got to where you are.
Well, that's I'm a New Yorker. I'm one of the rare New Yorkers who stayed in New York, and so I grew up. Well, I grew up in Queens, but I moved to Manhattan when I was 15, and I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York. That's kind of a bit of a famous place. The public school. I went to public school the whole time, but so by high school, I already knew I was in the music. I was in the music field, and I decided to stay in New York for college, and I went to City College, to Hunter College, part of the City College system. And I studied music theory and history. So I was a classical person, pianist. That was my instrument. It is my instrument. By being in New York for school, I really got a leg up in the business because not only was I able to go to theater and I had cheap tickets to the Met Opera and I went to the Philharmonic all the time. And, I was very much engaged in the musical community here in town. But I also was able to start understanding what the different jobs were that people were doing. So I saw lots of my friends from high school who were gifted musicians going off to places around the country to conservatories and to other schools. And I was sort of, I was a little bit interested in that. But I realized that by staying in town, I wasn't going to have to come back and land here as an unknown like every other college graduate. I was already here and embedded a little bit. So that turned out to be an advantage that I didn't really plan ahead of time, but that was a little bit of a leg up. As I said, I was a classical musician, and I pretty much figured I'd go to grad school and be a musicologist of some kind. Then one year between summer, between maybe it was my junior and senior year, maybe it was before that. I had a friend who was a composer for the musical theater and was going to do a summer stock show up in the Berkshires at a place called Lenox Arts Center. And she said to me, "Hey, they tell me that I get a music assistant. Do you want to come up and be my music assistant?" And I didn't really know what a music assistant was going to do. Neither did she, actually. And I said, "But sure, that sounds like fun." And I went up there, and that's where I discovered theater for the first time. And it was really eye opening. And I thought, well, this is a whole lot more fun than what I thought I'd be doing. And maybe there's room for me somewhere here. And that was kind of the beginning of my music copying because I realized as music assistant, largely my job was to do a lot of notation. And I found I was very good at it and I really liked it. And when I got back to town, my friend recommended me to other of her composer friends. And the next thing you know, I kind of had a little business going. And I didn't really plan it, but it just sort of grew from there. So that's that.
Hmm. One of the things I love about being a musician, the lifestyle is hard. It's hard to be in music, but I'm frequently struck by how many opportunities there are in the music world. There's so many ways to make a living with the skills that we learn. Studying music in school, and so I love.
Yeah, and I mean these days, while I think you also were looking to for me to speak a little bit to young people who might want to do what I do, and I mean music copying is not exactly a burgeoning industry, especially now when we have no theater happening, and the foreseeable timeline is stretching farther and farther away, but we will be back, and things will come back probably maybe in a different way, but definitely will be back in terms of the industry. I mean, it is hard. I'll say it's hard to be a freelance musician in New York, and I think if you're looking to do music prep work, you really do have to have all those skills that I mentioned, and you have to be willing to do a lot of different things. So you might get a music copying job one day, you might be a rehearsal pianist the next day, you might be being a music assistant on a musical production the next day, and you have to be willing to mix it up until you kind of find your path. And once you are identified at being better at one thing than another, chances are that's the path you'll end up on. And you may not know what that is right at the outset, but having a lot of skills at your disposal is really the key to being able to make a living here, I think.
Hmm. So in pre-coronavirus, what did it kind of look like a just a normal Tuesday in the office?
Well, a normal Tuesday in my office would mean that there would be six of us in the room. I have an office, as I said, in Times Square, so near all of the theaters, because normally I'm lucky enough to have more than one show going on at one time. We used to have really fixed seasons, fall openings and spring openings, but once we started doing shows all over, not just in New York, then the schedules kind of run through the whole year because you have regional theaters that are producing several things in a year, and you never know when they're going to open. Summers used to be pretty dead. Now summers can be very busy. So on a typical Tuesday, I might have myself plus 4 or 5 other people in. Everybody could be working on a different project. There really have been days in my office when each person is on something separate, different. Other times on a day like that, it might be we're just crashing through to meet crazy deadlines, and all of us will be scrambling to make something happen for a 6 p.m. rehearsal. Everybody will be on one job at that moment, at that day. When we have several things going on at once, it could be that the typical thing would be to have band rehearsals before an 8 p.m. show. So I could be doing fixes in the afternoon for 2 different shows, both of which have a 6:30 band call. So a lot of scrambling in the afternoon, and then I might dispatch one person to one rehearsal and another person to another rehearsal, and then I might check in on both of them. That could be a typical day in my office. In addition to copyists, by the way, other jobs that are needed in an office like mine, I use proofreaders because, again, we really don't want to have any time wasted at rehearsals. There can be a dedicated proofreader in the room. There would also be somebody that we call a librarian who does all the printing and the binding of material. You have to remember, we're just still dealing with physical parts. I have not yet done a show where everybody's using iPads, although some players are now preferring to use iPads. But we mostly provide printed music, so that means having a librarian who prints parts and scores and is responsible for tape binding. We do everything accordion fold, old school. I never do musical theater in ring binders or in spiral bind. You can't do that because of the rapid changing of everything. You don't want to put our music in a binder because a lot of times players like to stretch their music out over the music stand to avoid page turns. So there are different people wearing different hats in my office.
Mm-hmm. Like, what's the maximum amount of shows that you can work on at one time?
I couldn't tell you that. I mean, I guess in theory, if there are 6 of us in the room, it would be 6 shows.
Yeah.
um, I mean, there have been seasons where it's been, one overlapping the other. The worst case is when, I mean, I've had seasons even recently where I'll have a sort of a lineup of shows, and the rehearsal periods will be one week off from one another. So, on one Tuesday, we'll start the rehearsal process, the band rehearsals for one show. And then the following Tuesday would be the band rehearsals for the next show. And then the following Tuesday, yet another one. So all during that time, you're having to service the initial delivery for the show number one. And then as you progress, then you do the initial delivery for show number two while you're working on revisions for show number one. Then you add on show number three. So you're dealing with the initial delivery for show number three, and then you're in revisions and fixes day to day for show number one and two. So it's there. That's really. I mean, I know it sounds crazy because a lot of times you think, well, how much work could there be for music copyists? And I think that the answer is, unfortunately, and I will freely admit that because of my longevity, and because of the reputation of my office, we do get the lion's share of work. And I know that doesn't make it easy for a lot of people jumping into the field, because they'll say, why does all the work always go there? And the answer is because we can handle it and we deliver and we're a known entity, and that's sort of how it's been. And I don't mean to sound in any way, well, I don't know what the word is. I don't. There's a bit of hubris there. I feel like we are very, very lucky to have that degree of work, that I can actually have 4 or 5 people who are technically freelancers, but who end up getting all of their work through my office. That's pretty much how it works. They are freelancers in that they could work for anyone and do any jobs, and they do outside jobs as well, but they depend on me pretty much 100% for their work. And that's a very, very privileged position. There aren't a lot of copying houses left, so I have some good colleagues in New York, 2 other offices that do sort of what I do, maybe 3, but there aren't a lot of us. And there aren't a lot of professional copyists, because outside of where we are and outside of LA, which is the other huge industry for copying, there aren't that many places you can do this work. So,
Hmm. How early are you working? Like, when do you come in the process of getting like a brand new show together? Like, is it several months?
oh gosh, no, this is the thing. This is actually a very good question. I'm going to go back to the old days. In the old days when we had pen and we were using pen and ink, people understood just by virtue of the fact that it was a handmade craft. People understood that it took time, right? So that we would have 6 weeks lead time before, say, the first band rehearsal for a show. Because, first of all, the bands were larger. Okay, you had more instruments in the day, and that's just an economic issue. And people, meaning the not only the music team but producers, everyone understood that the job of providing that music took time to do. When we switched over to using computer software, that understanding changed to be, well, it's in the computer, you just push the button and it's done. How long can that take? And so you see where the problem is. So now we get, if we're lucky, we have 2 to 3 weeks to do a job. Really, the crunch is the 2 weeks prior to a band call. And that, of course, depends on the size of the show, the size of the orchestra, whether we're creating a piano conductor part, whether we're not creating a piano conductor part, etc. So, but the time frame is definitely compressed. And that is a function of, well, it's a function of several things. The technology, right? Main driver of change, I think. Also, I think that people nowadays, because of the technology, the creatives continue to change and change and change, and nothing really gets set until the absolute last moment that it has to. And
Hmm.
so that creates work for us in a very scrambly way. So you also have to, another quality that you have to have is you have to have incredible organizational skill, because keeping track of changes makes you kind of a bean counter. You have to keep a lot of spreadsheets, and you have to have a great degree of calm in the face of the storm that is the changing rehearsal, the changes that come from rehearsal. So those are more qualities that you really want to develop.
So I most of the people I talk to don't have their own business, right? They're freelancers, they're whatever. So what are maybe like when you first kind of got going with your business, maybe what are some things that surprised you or that you were unprepared for, when or you didn't know you needed to know when you started a business?
Well, I mean, this is another strange thing, is that I didn't really start a business. The business kind of grew up around me, sort of. I know this sounds sort of haphazard, but most people starting a business, you have a business plan, you raise capital, you do all kinds of things that traditional business people do, right? And that is not how this business, and I don't think any musician's business ever starts. It started by my getting a job after I came back from that summer of being a music assistant. I came back and my friend recommended me to a composer friend of hers. I did that job on my kitchen table. That composer recommended me to another composer. I did that job on my kitchen table, right? I got a phone call for another job while I was doing a particular job, and it occurred to me that I really couldn't deliver that deadline by myself. So I called a pal, and that pal came over and worked on the other side of my kitchen table. And then the next thing I knew, well, there was another job coming, and well, I might need more people than that. How's that going to happen? And eventually I realized that I needed to get off my kitchen table. And so I found a little tiny office space in the basement in the village in the city. And I was living downtown at the time, and it was around the corner from my house. And my business grew up in that little basement, and then eventually I moved to Times Square. So it was not a real plan. It just sort of sprung up as more work came my way. I also did work for other people. When I was coming into the business, there were several large copying offices in Midtown that handled all the Broadway work. And I did walk through the door of those places to say, I'm a young copyist and I want to know how to do this. And do you have work? And eventually I was able to be sort of mentored a little bit by by those people. I learned a lot in those offices. And I think these days people want mentorships as well. And I've really never had the time to be a good mentor to a lot of people. I mean, the people who work with me now, I suppose, would say that I might have mentored them in some sense, but they came to me pretty much fully fledged as musicians. I taught them how to do exactly what we do, but I learned from people who did it before me, and I'm now at the point in my career where I am teaching some. I mean, I've done 6 sessions for Maestra Music. I'm on the board of a group called Maestra Music in New York. I can tell you about that if you'd like. And we've been doing Maestra is a group. I'll do a little plug.
Sure.
We're a not for profit that provides support, visibility, community for women who are in the musical theater industry. Traditionally an underrepresented group, I have to say. I think we're working on some statistics and realize that 22% of the pit players are women in on
Mm.
Broadway, and that's a pretty low number considering that we're 51% of the population of the country. So our membership is made up of women, non-binary, gender non-conforming composers, music directors, arrangers, orchestrators, copyists, rehearsal pianists, music assistants. We have a directory. Go to maestramusic.org and you'll see a directory of women who have all kinds of skills, and it's searchable by instrument, by lots of other criteria. During this shutdown, we started a technical workshop series, and we've been doing 1 hour sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And a lot of our members have incredible skills, and they're teaching, and I've been teaching. I have I said 6 different sessions on Finale and Sibelius. It's really been an amazing lifeline for me and for so many people during this shutdown. It's been an amazing community. So that's kind of, I'm in a little bit of a new phase. I never would have had time to involve myself in that organization to this degree had the shutdown not happened. So there's a sort of a silver lining because I think a lot of us in New York were seeking community that didn't exist before. And during this time, we've had time to really build it. And that's been a tremendous surprise and tremendously satisfying, especially because I'm on the board and we're trying to make this into something that will be lasting to serve our community, over the long haul. So that's new information.
Yeah, I've really felt that with the lockdown of missing my community, missing being in rehearsals and missing, sitting in the green room and things like that. And so
Yeah,
I've really appreciated it. I've done some of the maestro workshops and I've really appreciated groups like that have tried to find ways to do community in a different way.
yeah. And also, I should note, in case I missed it, that our workshops are open to all, by the way, men, women, any gender that you prefer. And it's not just for women, but all of our teachers are maestri. so, so that's, yeah. So you noticed in those workshops that it really was, while we stuck to business during the workshop time, there was also quite a sort of social aspect to it, right? The
Hmm.
chat being very lively, people connecting with one another, even if it's just to say, "Hey, nice to see you here," checking in. And I've developed friendships through those chats that I never had when we were having our live monthly meetings. Just I don't can't explain it, but it felt much more, and it continues to feel much more intimate to me to be on those Zoom calls. And I know people are making fun of how tedious Zoom calls are and all that, but honestly, I love it. I think it's a great way to communicate.
Yeah, I can't imagine, being locked down and not, like 200 years ago or something. I think, yeah, at least
Right?
we have some sort of lifeline
Yep. Yep.
through technology.
Yep.
So you've kind of touched on some of these things already with like the size of the pit orchestras has gotten smaller and the rise of technology in your field. Have you seen any other things change like in the industry at large over your decades?
Well, I think the main thrust was the technological change, the time frame change. I mean, I can't. I'm trying to think of other. I'm sure I'm missing other big subjects, but I suppose that the music departments seem to have gotten bigger. There seem to be more titles now. There's a music supervisor. There's a music director who we always call the conductor. There's a dance arranger. There's a vocal arranger. There's, of course, the composer, there's lyricist. But these jobs, I mean, maybe they always existed, but it seems like there are a lot more fingers in the pie these days, in terms of where I get my information from. I interface with a lot more people in a music department than I might have at one time. Music assistant is a big one. The music assistant used to be just the intern that, would Xerox some pages and go get coffee. And now the music assistant seems to be the heartbeat of the department.
Hmm.
So that's a change, and that's a great way to come up and learn an awful lot on a lot to, if you're interested in musical theater.
Hmm. I would imagine that there's probably times where your job can get stressful. You said you're working on pretty tight deadlines. Do you have any like stress management techniques that you do to kind of help you like stay calm and get the job done?
Well, I'd like to say throwing things across the room, but I try not to do that. So I really don't do that. Honestly, having good friends and good relationships with people is the thing that to me is the best stress management method. Is to remember to lift your head up from the computer screen, go out, have a meal, talk to people, have some fun. I mean, I just took 2 weeks, and my wife and I went out to Long Island, out to East Hampton, and we did some hiking and we're playing tennis, and just to get outside. And those are the stress relievers. Of course, meditation and yoga, would be key for anyone in any field, to use as great outlets. So I think it's nothing earth shattering, but I think that maintaining relationships with people not only in your industry but outside your industry, so that you have less of a tunnel vision, and that you have sort of a broad relationship to the world, not just to the hothouse of the musical theater world, which is its own universe, as you probably are aware.
Hmm. Hmm. For sure.
I know that you had touched on an email to me, and I think you wanted to ask it before and didn't know how to ask it. And I think you're probably talking about how we're remunerated for this work. How do we get paid? Was that where you were trying to go before?
Yeah, I never know. I'm curious, but I never know kind of whatever you feel is appropriate to talk
Well,
about
yeah.
pay.
I can't give you, dollars and cents, because every job really is different. But I
Hmm.
can say that the method. I mean, I'll tell you, for anybody who's listening doesn't know how to charge for their services. The answer is the easiest way to estimate a job for music copying is as piecework, which is really how our union contracts are designed. At least they always were. I'll give you an exception at the end of my paragraph. But piecework meaning per page, right? If you have a musical, and if somebody comes to me and says, I have a musical and it's going to be 2,500 bars of music, and this is my band lineup. I have a piano conductor, I have a keyboard two, I have two woodwinds, I have two strings, I have two guitars, bass, drums, right? Well, I put that in my head, and I put that in my spreadsheet, and I look at it and I say, I can now determine from that information how much to charge for that job. Because I know, and I'll give you some details. People get really hammered when they make a flat price and the producer and the manager always want a flat price, right? They want an all in package. This is what it's going to cost, hell or high water. They don't want any surprises. And we say, that's fine, but that's too much risk for me, because I don't know what you're going to do creatively in your show. I could have things where I redo things 10 times. So I don't want to take that risk. I'm your employee, right? I should not be taking that risk. You need to be taking that risk. So I say to them, you've got 2,500 bars of music. You have this lineup of instruments. I think to myself, let's go and say an average bass part, an average guitar part might have 40 bars of music on a page, right? Think about it. 10 lines on your page, 4 bars of music across your page, right? So let's say we say a page of music is 40 bars. So I take my 2,500 bars for that bass part, and I divide by 40 bars on a page, and I get a number that says my bass part is going to be I'm sorry, I'm not a good enough mathematician. My bass part is going to be 72 pages long. Okay. And then I say, what if the page rate for my bass part is $10 page? So I'll say my bass part's going to be $720. Well, my guitar part is going to be X. My second guitar part is going to be X. My drum part is going to be X. And I do the math and I say, this is how much based on the number of bars and the number of instruments. This is my estimate. And then I give an estimate and it's based on something tangible. If somebody said to me, how long did it take you to copy Jagged Little Pill? I would say, I have not the vaguest idea how long it took us to copy Jagged Little Pill. But I could go to my records and say, but all the single line parts amounted to 250 pages, and all the keyboard parts amounted to 400 pages, and the piano conductor was 300 pages long. I mean, I'm making those numbers up, but it's tangible, right? And each of those items has a piece rate. So you could say, make a page rate. A single line part costs one thing. A divisi part, like a drum part, will cost more than a single line part because it takes us longer to do, right? A piano conductor part would cost yet more because that takes the most time to do. So you gauge your work based on the amount of service that you're providing. And it's very hard to do that by the hour. So we try to do it by piecework. Now, sometimes we're asked to do work by the hour. You have to kind of translate for yourself the same calculation I just made and translate that into some kind of an hourly rate for yourself to say, how can I do this work and not get hammered so that at the end it turns out that I made $5 an hour, right? And that's the amateur's mistake, is agreeing to a cap, not understanding that you could be on the hook to just keep working and keep working and keep working. And every time you keep working, your hourly rate just went down. So does that kind of give you some sort of a gauge? Also, when we do union work, by the way, we have pension and health benefits that are added to that. Now, again, it's a luxury. Most people out in the, wherever you are in the country, you might not have a union. Might not have an employer who's even willing to engage somebody under those circumstances. But if you are lucky enough to be a member of a union, then you should be looking at, asking for health benefits and asking for pension benefits and all of that. And again, I'm in an exceedingly privileged position to be able to ask for those things and to get those things. But in New York, you pretty much can't, shouldn't work without it. Can't really work without it. That does that help in some way?
Yeah, that does. Like just hearing about how you advocate for yourself, and what you and your team need.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that what I was saying, that you need good negotiating skills. You need to be able to assure your employer that they're not going to get hammered, right? But you also need to explain to them that you can't be the one to be taking all the risk on their job. And also, if you want to know, I know that people are probably looking for dollars and cents. I'll just throw it out there. On our live performance general price list, that's for live performance work in New York, if you're a music copying librarian, so you're doing all the taping and printing and the running back and forth to the theater, making fixes, all of that, the hourly rate on that is $34.50 an hour. Okay, that's the rate on that. On Broadway, the hourly rate for that work is 41 and change an hour. So that'll tell you kind of a ballpark of what those contracts in New York are stipulating. And then, of course, benefits would go on top of that. So, and there are lots of different contracts. There are every sector of work that has a negotiated contract. So there's Broadway, there's a National Musical Theater scale, local New York general prices scale, and then all the federation agreements that account for electronic media. So sound recordings, film, television, public television, etc. And all of those have negotiated rates that are different from one another because they're negotiated against management groups that ask for different things and fight harder or fight less hard. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have like copyright issues come up?
That's not really my domain.
Okay.
I provide music for these live shows. It's really on the business people for those shows to deal with all of that. Anything that's a new show, is being dealt with by the composers and their agents and all of that. And I don't really enter into that. I do work for the rental publication companies, for example, when all of the shows are going out for license. So if you're in Kansas City and you're doing a regional production of Name the Show, the music will likely come to you from an agent like Roger and Hammerstein organization, now part of Concord Music, or MTI. Used to be Tams Whitmark, also incorporated under Concord now. Samuel French, also incorporated under Concord. So those, when I do work for those people, I'm essentially taking the materials from the shows, and we make a final version based on whatever the authors deem to be the final version. And it's my job to do all the cleanup and provide that material to those rental companies. But that doesn't really enter into copyright issue at all. It's just more work, you know.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to think of a lot more questions after we hang up.
One of the things that you had asked, and I think this could be a good ending to your podcast, is you asked about any highlights from
Mm-hmm.
the time in the business. And of course, there have been many. There have been many. I'm not a name dropper, so I don't really like to, to go down that route. But needless to say, we've done. My office has done work for all the great Broadway composers of now, from whether it's Steve Flaherty or right now Stephen Sondheim. Just going all the way the whole gamut. We work with Jonathan Tunick. I work with Harold Wheeler. All these people are titans. But from a highlight standpoint, I would say that while I'm in the business, I'm also a fan. So for me, my office handles the Tony Awards. So every year we do all of the music for the actual Tony's broadcast that you see on CBS.
Oh, that's cool.
So all the play-ons, all the playoffs, all the production numbers, those are different from what appear in the shows themselves. And my office provides all of that material for the Tonys. So every year I am lucky enough to get to go to not only all the recording sessions prior to the Tonys, but I'm standing in the wings near the orchestra at Radio City Music Hall, and to stand on that stage and look out at that astonishing Art Deco hall that holds 6,000 people, to be there on the stage while performers are coming and going in the wings, and everybody's all on a high because they're so excited to be there. And then I can stand in the wings and watch the winners come off stage with their statues, and you really feel the joy. And I just always am so excited to be a part of that business. Even though I've been a part of this business for decades, it still is a highlight to be standing there at that spot every June. And I'm just sad to say that this year we did not have the Tony Awards, and I know they're talking about some sort of version coming up this fall, but I don't know what it is, and it surely won't be the same as being with everybody live. But I hope that next year, we're back in the saddle.
Well, I appreciate so much with the work that you do, because I know that it benefits me. I mean, it benefits the work that you do is so far reaching, and I've benefited from it a lot in my the years that I've performed and played. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.